Sure thing. Good to be here. And I can kind of see the people in the room. I see some movement. So I won't be able to see you if you're raising your hand. So Chris, I might rely on you for some support in facilitating questions. But good to be here again. I think I met with you all back in April, maybe, to talk about this project. And good to be back and give some updates. So again, I'm Theresa Conley. I'm a principal planner with the Statewide Planning Unit and the project manager for the multimodal inventory. And let's see if I can get the tech working. Okay, I'm sharing my screen, I believe. All right, great. I can advance things. That's always a win. All right. So the agenda for today, I will give a really quick project recap in case there's any new people in the room or just because it's been since April since we talked about the project. And then I'll get right into some project updates and really focus on where we're at with QA/QC and data development. And then I will do a live data demo with where we're at with some completed data sets. And then hopefully we'll have a good amount of time for discussion. So project recap, we've used the slide a lot, and I think it's a good one because it says a lot. The core purpose of this project is to pursue a collaborative effort to produce a multimodal infrastructure data set that complies with the updated TPR and supports TPR compliant TSPs, transportation system plans, within metropolitan areas. And we really want this data set to be maintained over the long term and sustainable. So to that end, some core project outcomes are having a standardized data set, and that's both geometry and attributes across these 48 jurisdictions. A definition of methodologies, data collection, processing, and QA/QC protocols. And then we'll need a long-term data management and maintenance framework. And we're starting to dig into that now. And I'll post some questions for you on the screen to think about and maybe give some feedback on. So the project data sets and sources are pretty much aligned with what's in the TPR for jurisdictions within MPO areas. This slide describes the sources kind of by the font type. So you'll see in bold, regular text, these are existing data sets, primarily around vehicular travel and freight. And then we have some newer data sets that we're developing or augmenting existing data with via AI. And our AI vendor is Ecopia. And they're partnered with Vexcel for the aerial imagery. So if I throw those firms around, that's who they are, our vendors. For transit facilities, we are tapping GTFS, which has been kept up to date. So that's a great resource. And then there's a couple data sets required in rule that weren't quite appropriate for us to develop as part of this project. So one of these is key destinations. We're developing a structure for local jurisdictions to then have that conversation during their TSP process and then update the geospatial data set with that information. This is kind of out of date already, the timeline. But the reason I'm sharing it is to just give an overall sense of where we're at with the project and to really stress the iterative nature of the project. So obviously there are some ongoing tasks like project management, engagement with groups like yours, and then the long-term data management framework down below. You'll see those as ongoing tasks. But the core work of this project there's a lot, and we had to divvy it up. We realized really quickly across several cohorts. So we have a pilot group, and I'll give an update on where we're at with that data. And then we have a 2025 cohort and a 26 cohort that has it has actually the bulk of the jurisdictions in it. So I wanted to note that here that it's iterative and we're learning with each iteration, which was our intent. And we're really doing one-on-one collaboration, having individual meetings with jurisdictions to get an updated data set, do a gaps analysis and see where we need to fill in the data, and then to do some rounds of QA/QC. So that happens at the jurisdictional basis in these iterative cycles. So where are we at with those iterative cycles? Well, We have delivered draft data to all of the pilot jurisdictions as listed on the screen. And we are making revisions based on when the final, when the feedback comes in from the local agencies. And we recognize agencies have a lot of other things going on, so we haven't prescribed a specific due date for their feedback. And so we haven't delivered any pilot data sets yet, in part to respect local capacity, but we do anticipate doing so soon. As we finalize the edits that we've received back. We are going ahead with the 2025 cohort, and we've met with all of those jurisdictions, and we're digging into the draft data. And we have provided a few draft data sets at this point, and we're still targeting completion for those data sets by the end of this year. So fingers crossed. There is another thing that's been lagging, and that's the intersection point data. This is something we have acquired through the vendor as well. And I understand there were some issues that our technical team worked through, and they recently received the intersection data. And this data set is important and affects the delivery of information about turn lanes, what exists at an intersection, right? Buffers. And also unmarked crossings. We're using this for our methodology to identify unmarked crossings, which AI was not able to do because of the lack of paint. So there's a couple impacts to this data coming in late. Coming up soon is another round of community engagement and committee engagement. And just this morning, we were looking at dates. So if you're on a committee, look for a meeting invite soon. And if you're not on a committee, we will be emailing out about a virtual briefing coming up in the kind of November timeframe. And similarly, we'll talk through in-progress data sets at those meetings and have an honest conversation about issues that we've identified and are resolving and where we have limitations. And then really delving into that long-term management with that information in hand too, right? How do we approach that collaborative management concept? So some things that we have started to ask ourselves and ask our committee members, the local jurisdictions when we are meeting with them, are these questions up on the screen. You know, honestly, what is your capacity to manage existing data? What about new data sets like the bike ped data? What's the best role for ODOT or regional partners like MPOs or COGs? How do we avoid redundant data sets? And we have a sense of this, but it's always good to confirm what formats and platforms work the best. You know, we're receiving most of the data in a geospatial format, so it seems intuitive that that would be a good format to keep it in and share it visually and for download. And also, what uses are we looking at beyond TSPs? That's something we're always asking and can inform how we maintain the data long term or what we prioritize. Right now, we are really in the thick of QA, QC, reviewing data sets, having local conversations, and updating data sets. And we establish quality assurance measures from the start of the project, including requirements and standards that we vetted through our committees and working groups in some cases. They're documented in a memo, of course, and we'll carry those forward throughout the data set and update as we learn and have to iterate things. We have been having ongoing training and collaboration within the team and externally. And so, for example, we have issues for resolution spreadsheet that I'll share a screenshot of in a couple of minutes. My point being is QA/QC is critical to this process. And what I have on screen is kind of the stage we're in now of data development. We review data as it's added to each data set in each attribute as it is calculated. And then we do a visual review, computer-based review for the most part, so we can cover more geography basically. And then a final review for accuracy and completion. The contract does require that between 1% and 5% of AI developed data is reviewed. And I understand that our team is going far beyond that. Just in part because of the data development process. It's just part of it. A couple examples of the QA/QC that we're completing are looking for omissions. One thing that we noticed very early on was tree canopy cover. It has created areas where the AI algorithms just didn't know that there was sidewalk, for example. So looking for that, especially in the Mid-Valley and up in Portland, think Ladd's Addition. We noticed that area really quickly is lacking some sidewalks due to the AI methods. Is the location correct? Is the coverage correct that we need in terms of the contract? In terms of attributes, we are looking at whether the values comply with our standards, if they're accurate, for example, on ownership. Are there null values where we need to fill in the attribute? And here's this is that spreadsheet that I mentioned earlier, the issues for resolution spreadsheet. And you know, the AI data is not perfect. And talking with peers that are using AI for different things, this is what we are seeing. There's still a lot of human energy that goes into producing things using AI. And we are finding that with this project too. One thing that came up early, just to give a few examples, are crossing distances. This is something that the city of Beaverton highlighted early on, where AI was capturing into the sidewalk, for example, for that crossing distance. So we developed a solution where we would use a lane cover polygon layer that came from Ecopia to subtract out that additive part within the sidewalk and then recalculate the length. Another issue that we noticed early on, to flag another number of lanes where there is no obvious painted center line, and we established some assumptions that local roads would default to 2 lanes, and then for collectors and above, we would determine if they're 1-way or 2-way, and then use aerial imagery and human power to update the attributes for that. A couple attributes that continue to be sticky are, well, bike lane width less so. We found a solution. Sometimes if a bike lane, for example, is next to unmarked parking, AI would calculate a very wide bike lane, which is great, but not actually what was happening on the ground. And so the team developed a solution where we would review any widths less than 3 feet and anything wider than 10 feet. Just across the board, we would review and adjust manually to make sure that we're having a good range of accurate ranges for bike lane width. It might not be precise, but at least we're in the ballpark for planning purposes. Sidewalk width, and this is the last one I'll highlight here unless people have questions. This is hard. Ecopia, I have found through my review of random jurisdictions data, generally the sidewalk width is pretty on point for easy areas, residential neighborhoods, for example, where a sidewalk width is really consistent. However, when we get into more complex areas, the Ecopia method of capturing width along a segment creates a greater margin of error. For example, I think bulb outs, that really changes what the average width is across a section. And we've had conversations at the project team and with jurisdictions about this. And this would be a really hard one to correct across the board at the scale we're working in. Think about all the sidewalks around the MPO areas. So that's one that's still an issue that we're resolving, and we might have to accept this as a limitation of the project. But that being said, some takeaways are, I mean, this is still some exciting data, right? We're getting data that we haven't had before, conflated and consistent at a statewide level. That's pretty exciting to me. We have crossing information, detailed intersection data, bike ped facility center lines, as opposed to the bike lanes, for example, being connected with the roadway center line. This is intended for planning level work, right? We knew that going in, that was the intent of the project, and that is what we are producing. It's definitely not data that we would want you to use for project development. Once you move into project delivery, definitely gather some more precise data. We are designing a data set that can be used for a level of traffic stress analysis and to support required reporting for GHG reduction performance measures. I am going to jump into a data demo. I will switch my screens, but before I do that, does anyone have any questions?
Okay, go ahead. Was the purpose of the project to harness AI or what?
No, it was not. It was something that was proposed through the selected consultant realized they would need to do to pursue data delivery at this scale. It had always been, it was in the contract. It is in the contract as an option along with a range of other data production, methods. But this was the one we started really focusing on as being the most efficient.
It seems like Google Street View could counter that problem with aerial photographs.
We are using, I know for when I'm reviewing data, I have the data up on one screen, the Google Street View on the other screen. We're using it as a tool for data review. One thing that came up really early on, even as the project was being scoped, is the need for authoritative data sets. And so we are at this stage limiting, not that you're talking about crowdsourced data, but crowdsourced data. That could be part of the solution long-term for maintaining some of these trickier data sets. But we are a little constrained this time around.
Yeah, Zachary, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Theresa. Just a couple of notes as somebody that had an opportunity to review the Hillsborough data. And I'm sure, Joseph, you're going to be super interested in that. I found, and I'm not saying, I can sometimes be trying to do my best to provide constructive criticism. I actually found the data to be pretty good. Certainly, I think it exceeded my expectations when taking a look at it. Looking at the different types of bike facilities, whether it was on street or buffered or cycle track, it did seem to do a good job of capturing that. For crossings, I did do my best to try and check to see a number of the mid-block crossings as well as ones that are developed on different types of on surfaces. So where there's concrete and some of the paint may be faded, AI still seemed to do a generally good job of being able to pick that up. Obviously, if it's on asphalt, that's a little bit different. You have a little bit more contrast. One thing I did notice as I was doing my QC from aerial, and I approached it the same way that Theresa did with two screens up at once, is that when we get down to things like calculating the level of traffic stress, the differences between 5 feet and 6 feet can sometimes be the difference between an LTS2 or an LTS3, and that's similar for bicycle and pedestrian facilities across a number of different elements. I found it a little bit difficult to make sure that I could get an accurate reading from the aerial. It's just not that precise necessarily, and sometimes that difference can be important. Ultimately, it does seem that if the data set is, we know it's not going to be 100%, and if there's mechanisms for local staff or others to go back and easily make edits and make some modifications, that should be able to clear up a lot of the information.
Thank you for sharing that, Zachary. And that is kind of what we've been hearing. We've tapped a range of internal ODOT folks to do some additional QA, QC, and just to build understanding too, right, of what's in the data set. And generally that's been the response is, hey, this is actually exciting and pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good. So that was great to feel validated or like that we're on the right track.
Yeah,
I'll share
thank you.
my
I was going to say, I know
while
it's,
Zachary's
I know
finishing, I'll share my screen with the data set and get ready for a data demo. Go ahead,
right. I was
Zachary.
going to say, I also really appreciated a lot of the work that the PMT did early to capture a lot of not concerns, but things that maybe didn't come out right on the very initial steps. And I think those, that work, then when it came time to opening up and doing additional jurisdictions, that seemed to really check off a lot of those boxes. And I think ultimately that a lot of that pre-work helped develop a much higher quality set of data for all these new ones that we're doing now.
Thank you, Zachary. And I didn't see if Peter Scheidema is on the call today. He's on our PNT, and he's been a great resource to have at the table. All right, so here, this is the internal tool that Zachary and I have been using and other ODOT folks for QA/QC. And what we have up on screen is a conflated data set for what we have so far at the statewide level. I thought I would focus on the Salem-Keizer area, since that's where many of you are today. So let's see, I don't know where I was gonna hone in on Mill Creek. That might take too long. Okay, so what I'm sharing right now are the PED routes. And so this is AI developed. I'll click on this so you can see what the attributes are looking like. Any attribute that's labeled with CFAC is something that's required in rule and our contract. And that includes primary user and primary use. We have type and oh, so this data set came from the jurisdiction, so the city of Salem. So we are tracking that, and it's valuable for obvious reasons. So this is a good time to mention that this isn't a compulsory activity. A jurisdiction they could say, I don't want to participate at all. So far, nobody said that. But we also have conversations about which data sets are really robust locally that we might just add some attributes to, which are jurisdictions going to just take whole, maybe the sidewalks layer, maybe they don't have any yet, so they just take what we're producing. So that differs a little bit with each jurisdiction, which complicates things on our side, but really respects the local ownership of the data and the good data sets that exist already in protocols. Let's see. This data set, it doesn't look like it doesn't have, we do have data for pathways through this park, for example. So if I was to pull up the individual City of Salem data, I imagine it would be included in there here. I'm going to actually turn off the statewide conflated data set and show you what we started with. Yeah. So we do have pathways for this park here that was produced through our AI vendor. And we have, this might have been actually, well, we produced it through the AI vendor, and the city of Salem may have provided in this case. But so I guess my point is we have trails, we have the sidewalks, and with that we have required CFAC attributes of type, user width. And so here is pretty accurate, right? 5.78, that passes the sniff test, I think. And we have condition. So this is one area where AI just couldn't produce condition. And so we have a methodology that we use based on adjacent year built of structures and typical rate of degradation. Not perfect, but it's a starting point. And if jurisdictions have better data, stuff like that updated. We have bike and ped crossing data. A little bit hard to see, but if you zoom in, so these are marked crossings. As I said, we're still producing unmarked crossing information using those intersection points that took a while to come in. But we have primary use, user, we have width and type, so marked and signalized. And this does not have the crossing distance currently, looks like. So still working on that. And then here, so the other legs of this intersection here must not have marked crossings. For roadways, This is oftentimes local data that we've added attributes to. So average travel lane width, for example, we've added using Ecopia data. We have classification, which would be existing in the data set at this point anyway. We have pavement condition. Sometimes jurisdictions provide that, oftentimes. Primary user, again, personal vehicle in this case. The source of the data. Oh, so this is for travel volume that is required in rules, in rule, and we are using replica with a good footnote that this should use it with care, right, for planning level purposes, because it's not actual traffic count. Let's see, bicycle routes. We haven't looked at that yet. I actually reviewed the city of Salem's data for the downtown area, and it was fairly interesting to look at, look for flaws or in our data, things to correct. We have conditions here that's based on the underlying surface, right, the roadway. We have the type, and this is a shared lane or bike lane. I will put an asterisk here. We are actually talking as a project team right now about making sure that what we have here in bicycle route type matches with AASHTO and best practice and what would work well for jurisdictions around the state. So we might see some slight adjustments to the typology. And let's see, let me click on, well, freight. This is from existing data, freight routes. Turn off the bike routes. I noticed that, and there's intermodal facilities. So maybe this area does not have any. I know down in Millersburg, it popped up, right, for the intermodal hub down here, if we were to look at their data set. And then quickly, I'll show you transit, and then I'll pause and see what kind of questions there might be. And this is pulled from GTFS. So it should be based on Chariot's data. And then at the statewide level, if we look at this again, we don't have transit completed at this point, looks like. All right, I will pause and see if there are some questions. James, are there nodes connecting the road and path sidewalk segment? Is this a full network one could traverse automatically? Is it routable? It is not routable, if that is your question. We wanted it. I heard it loud and clear that that was the desire. And I just, within the scope of the project, our project team, I don't think is able to get there. And it's not within the contract that it'd be routable. But in talking with Josh Roll, it seems like it's close.
Well, thanks, Theresa. I appreciate you monitoring the chat as well. I'll pause for a few other questions. Have some time for some one or two questions in the room or again online as well. So pause here for a second or two.
Chris on the side asked me about the replica. How do we, so that's, ODOT doesn't have access to replica. That's the contractor, right, has access to replica. They posted it, but is there a license, like, I know there's a lot of this is licensed data. You want to speak at all to like what limitations are around licensing?
Yes, and I'd have to go back to my notes on the replica specifically. We haven't had conversations about limitations on that data. But there are limitations on the bike ped data. So I'll share my screen again. Data that's produced via our AI vendor, Ecopia, cannot be posted for general public download. I can share it with you. Well, depending. Partner jurisdictions can access the full raw data and use it freely, share it with their partners. So whether they partner with a COG or a consultant to do planning work, you can share the data. It just can't be posted on a portal where Joe Q Public can download it and basically reverse engineer it. That is what the concern is. We anticipate this concern is short term as the AI race kind of tapers off and there's less concern about reverse engineering, but that is a limitation. And we're considering that with our long-term management structure. And obviously we'll have something that has some kind of sidewalls where some things can be shared publicly and there could be limitations on others.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
All right, yeah, thanks so much, Teresa. Appreciate the updates and also, what data is there. With that demo, you never know if those demos will work or not, and then work out well. So well done.
Sure. Well, it's good to see you all. And I think at the end of my slide, I have my contact info, but I think I'm also on the email thread. So feel free to email me if you have any specific questions, follow-ups.